Sir, I'm afraid you're in the wrong seat. This section isn't for people like you. Katherine Pierce's voice sliced through the celestial suite like a straight razor gliding over velvet. No need for volume. No need for barking orders. Just cold enough to freeze the air. Elias Vance didn't look up right away. His long, steady fingers continued moving across the carbon fiber laptop keyboard. On the screen, a cascade of green characters scrolled down. Quantum Encryption Sequence. Each line of code stacks into an invisible fortress. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, his fingers paused. No one noticed except him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. Just the bitter taste of something far too familiar. The sensation of being erased from a place where he absolutely belonged. The celestial suite, designed to indulge every sense, seemed to shrink into a gilded cage. Cream leather, polished ebony, lighting soft as velvet. The mingling scent of vintage wine and orchids. But now was nothing more than a backdrop for a trial. Katherine didn't rush. She held Elias's boarding pass between two fingers, lifting it toward the overhead light, tilting it slightly, as if inspecting counterfeit currency. Usually, our guests, her eyes swept over him from head to toe, looked different. Each word fell like a stone into still water. Cold, deep, no loud splash, but enough to send ripples that wouldn't fade for a long time. The people around them became mirrors. In seat 1C, a man in an Armani suit with a burgundy tie gave a small nod of approval, as if watching someone execute proper procedure. He leaned toward the person next to him and murmured, "Finally, someone is keeping the standards." In seat 1F, an elderly woman with brown skin and silver hair, pulled into a neat bun, gripped her handbag strap, her hand trembling. Her eyes darkened, sinking into memories of when she had to sit at the back of the bus. She knew this story all too well. In seat 2A, a young woman, Ava, with large headphones resting around her neck, had her phone camera already set to record. Her fingers moved fast, switching it on. A tiny red light blinked to life. A silent promise. The world would see this. Elias stayed seated, his shoulders as still as stone in the current of eyes flowing around him. "Sir," Katherine continued, her voice steady as a heart monitor, "I'll need you to present your boarding pass and identification again." Elias closed the laptop. No hurry. The hinge clicked shut so neatly it sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. He reached into his wallet and handed her the ticket and passport. Katherine didn't just glance. She studied, compared, eyes from photo to face, then back to the passport. Slowly enough to turn a routine check into a ritual of unmasking. "You're certain this is your seat?" she asked, not to confirm, but to plant doubt in the air. Elias didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the space between them, thick with the kind of silence that exists only when power is uneven. Every other passenger was watching. The faint clink of a spoon against a champagne flute slowed, then stopped. The rustle of a newspaper in 1D suddenly sounded deafening. Eyes didn't look directly, but they were all pointed in the same direction. Someone coughed softly. Someone else sipped wine, but didn't swallow right away. Katherine returned the ticket, but left the moment unresolved. "You understand, we must maintain standards for the celestial suite." "And what exactly are those standards?" Elias asked, his voice low, quieter than the air vents above them. She shrugged. A small gesture, but enough to say, "You know." A pause stretched between them. Elias leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced over his stomach. His eyes stayed locked on hers, as if reading a complex line of code she didn't even know she was writing. From the row behind, Ava tilted her phone just enough to capture everything. The ticket in Katherine's hand, the glint of light off her silver necklace, and Elias's eyes, still as a winter lake, flat, but impossible to gauge the depth. The investor in 1C exhaled sharply, as if relieved someone had finally done the right thing. The elderly woman in 1F looked down to avoid meeting anyone's gaze, but her fingers tapped the strap of her handbag, the heartbeat of anger held in check. Katherine glanced toward David, the young male flight attendant standing a few feet away, and gave a barely noticeable nod. He stepped forward, positioning himself just behind Elias. A new shadow fell over seat 1A. "You can move to business class while we recheck your information," Katherine said, her tone wrapped in velvet but cored with steel. An invitation disguised as an order. A step down wasn't just a change of seats. It was an admission, a bow to an unspoken standard everyone understood. Elias still didn't rise. One hand rested on the edge of his laptop, like a tiger placing a paw on the ground, not striking, but promising what could come next. Silence. Silence deep enough to hear your own heartbeat. The seatbelt sign above them lit up. The captain's warm baritone came over the speakers. "We'll be taking off in just a few minutes." Katherine didn't look up. Her eyes stayed locked on Elias, waiting. On Ava's phone screen, a caption appeared. "Suite 1A, watch this." Elias tilted his head slightly, the overhead light drawing a fine line across his cheekbone. He spoke, but instead of explaining or arguing, he simply asked, "Are you sure you want to go further down this road?" A question. No threat. No pleading. Just a mirror held up, letting her see herself. She didn't answer right away. Her lips pressed into a line before she turned away, but she didn't back down. The celestial suite held its taut, string-tight quiet. Someone, or everyone, knew that this was only the beginning. Elias reopened his laptop, the screen flaring to life like a slash of light in the heavy silence. He didn't type, only let the pale blue glow wash over his face. "Sir," Katherine Pierce straightened her posture, her tone unchanged. "Your ticket will be fully refunded. But I need you to leave this seat immediately." Elias looked up, his gaze unervingly calm. "This is my seat, my ticket, my name." Katherine didn't back down. She signaled to David, the young male attendant, to step forward. He held a small scanner over Elias's ticket, a short beep sounding before he read the display. "Mr. Vance. First class. Suite 1A." He paused for half a second, then added, "But I'll need to confirm with my supervisor." "You just scanned it," Elias said, eyes never leaving his laptop screen. "What's left to confirm?" David flicked a quick glance toward Katherine. No reply. In seat 2A, Ava didn't miss a beat. Her phone was already switched to live stream mode, the title blazing across the top. "Kicked out of first class because of skin color? Alpenstartje Ascendiair." In seconds, the viewer count jumped from hundreds to thousands, then tens of thousands. Comments flooded the feed. Hashtag Suite1. "Someone save this now." "Racism in the air." "Posting this to Twitter right now." Each comment was a wave, and those waves were pounding against the glass walls of the celestial suite. "Mr. Vance, I need your cooperation." A new voice broke in, deep, gravelly, tired, belonging to Officer Miller, airport security, just stepping inside. His white shirt was slightly wrinkled, badge glinting faintly at his belt. Elias turned his head slowly. "And if I refuse, then I'll have to use force." Miller's voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough for the whole cabin to hear. A sharp humph came from seat 1C. The investor leaned back, speaking loudly enough for Ava's live stream mic to catch. "Drag him out. I've got $1 million deal in LA." In 1F, the elderly silver-haired woman suddenly raised her head. Her voice trembled but stayed clear. "Leave him alone. He's done nothing wrong." No one else spoke. No one touched her. But the air shifted. Elias remained still, a rock in the middle of a rushing current. He looked at Officer Miller. "You have 60 seconds to think about who you're really working for." Miller frowned. "You have 60 seconds to get off this plane." The seatbelt sign stayed lit. The captain's voice returned, this time slightly tense. "Crew, prepare for takeoff." Katherine sensed the moment tipping in her favor. She stood right beside Elias, like a judge poised to deliver the verdict. Ava raised her phone higher, the frame shaking slightly. The live stream was exploding with comments. "This is it. Speak up. What's he gonna do?" Elias drew a slow breath and set his hand on his phone. The matte black case bore no logo, only a small string of etched characters, something a few people watching might recognize as military-grade encryption hardware. "Sir, all electronic devices must," Miller began. "This call matters more than airplane mode," Elias cut in, his voice dropping like a metal weight onto a glass table. He pressed a single number. No hold music, No long connection tone. Activate Protocol Omega, Elias said, clearly enough for everyone to hear. Everything happened almost instantly. The cabin lights flickered, the entertainment screens at every seat went black, then flashed a single red line. System error. Network offline. The captain's voice came through again, this time stripped of composure. We are experiencing a critical technical malfunction. Entire Ascendia air flight. Please remain calm. Murmurs erupted. The man in 1C snatched up his phone, opening a stock trading app. No connection. He tried his cellular network. Nothing. His face paled. David stood frozen, eyes darting to Katherine. She muttered under her breath, "What the hell?" Officer Miller's phone rang. He answered, and whatever he heard in the first few seconds stopped him cold. His expression shifted. He stepped back without another word. The cockpit attendant emerged, hands trembling, holding out the satellite phone to Katherine. It's CEO Julian Croft. He wants to speak to the passenger in seat 1A. No one spoke. The only sound were the whisper of the air system and the pounding in the chests of those who knew they were witnessing a moment when power had just flipped. Elias didn't look at Katherine. He simply reached out and took the phone. Elias held the phone to his ear, but his voice was loud enough for those nearby to catch every word. "You're speaking to your landlord, Julian, and the rent is due." On the other end, Julian Croft's voice was strung tight, ready to snap. "What the hell did you just do to my system?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He let the silence seep into the cabin, as if every passenger was waiting for the same answer. His eyes settled on Katherine Pierce, still standing beside the seat, her face taut, one hand unconsciously gripping the armrest. "You know exactly what I did," Elias said, his tone steady, no louder than the slow churn of the engines. "Nexus Innovations doesn't just maintain Ascendia Air's booking system. We built it. We own it. And right now, it's asleep." A murmur rippled from 1C to 2A. The Armani-clad investor shifted in his seat, as though he'd just realized who really held the reins. Elias went on, each word hammered into the air. "Protocol Omega is a clause in the contract. Hidden, but legal, reserved for severe breaches of dignity and blatant discrimination. Triggering, it means the entire digital infrastructure of Ascendia Air locks down until the matter is resolved at the highest level." The other end was silent for 3 beats before Julian Croft spoke again. "What do you want? Money? Equity?" Elias glanced toward Ava in seat 2A. Her phone's camera light still glowed red, the live stream feed racing with hundreds of thousands of viewers. He knew every word he was about to say wouldn't just reach Croft. It would echo far beyond. "I don't want money," Elias said. "I want 3 things. First, the immediate suspension of Katherine Pierce and all crew members involved, pending an independent investigation. Not termination, investigation. Second, mandatory unconscious bias training for every Ascendia Air employee within 90 days, designed by a leading research institute. Cost, roughly $50 million. Pay for it with last year's executive bonuses. Third, the creation of an independent reporting portal overseen by Nexus Innovations for passengers to log discrimination incidents. Every complaint must be addressed transparently and publicly." Katherine swallowed hard, her gaze pinned to the floor. David, standing 2 steps away, let his shoulders sink. In seat 1F, the elderly woman exhaled in relief but kept her eyes sharp. Ava adjusted her phone, zooming in on Elias's face, calm, dry, no trace of sweat, even as the cabin seemed to compress under invisible pressure. Julian Croft's voice came faster now. "Elias, you realize every passing minute burns millions off my company's value." "And you know," Elias replied, "every time this happens, millions of people lose a little more faith in fairness." The cabin was deathly still. No coughs, no shifting in seats. Elias leaned slightly toward Katherine. "Mrs. Pierce, I don't want to destroy your career. I want you to be the first to complete this training. And when you finish, you'll lead it. Punishment without redemption is just revenge." Katherine lifted her head. Tears welled, but didn't fall. She gave a small nod, an unspoken consent. In 1C, the investor had stopped tapping his foot, now watching Elias like a variable he'd never accounted for. The elderly woman in 1F smiled faintly, a mix of pride and relief. On the line, Julian Croft exhaled, long like signing an invisible contract. Fine, I agree. Smart, Elias said. Then he turned his gaze directly to Ava's camera, his words now aimed at more than Croft. This isn't a story about a seat. This is a story about dignity. Real power isn't the ability to break things. It's the ability to rebuild them better. The statement dropped like a stone into the social media lake. Ava's livestream exploded. Quote this exactly. That's leadership. Hashtag Protocol Omega. Elias gave a slight nod, the period at the end of the negotiation, and handed the phone back to the attendant without another word. Katherine stepped back, David following. Officer Miller lingered near the door, his eyes avoiding Elias's. But no one left the suite. Everyone knew this wasn't the end. The satellite phone was still in Elias's hand, but instead of holding it to his ear, he switched it to speaker. Julian Croft's voice spilled into the cabin, taut and uneasy, like a soundtrack warped out of tune. Elias, you realize, don't you? Give this a few more minutes, and the media will turn it into a full-blown global disaster. Elias leaned back in seat 1A, not rushing his reply. He stared at the celestial suite's ceiling, where the LED strips cast cold, surgical lines of light, then tilted his head and let his words drop in slow, leaden beats. Julian, you've forgotten something. When you fly, you're flying on a platform we built. When you take off, you're standing on Nexus Innovation's runway. And today, you just broke the terms for staying airborne. A faint murmur flickered through seat 1C. The investor had stopped tapping the armrest, his eyes no longer those of a spectator, but of a man recalculating everything. In 1F, the elderly silver-haired woman gently set her bag at her feet, fingers lacing together as if bracing to hear a verdict. Ava in 2A lifted her phone higher, widening the shot to capture both Elias and the cabin. The livestream had surged past 500,000 viewers. Elias began listing his demands without a pause. 1. Immediate suspension of Katherine Pierce and all crew involved. Independent investigation. No terminations yet, but they do not fly until the findings are in. 2. Mandatory unconscious bias training for every Ascendia Air employee within 90 days, designed by the American Institute for Social Reform. Estimated cost, $50 million. 3. Creation of an independent reporting portal overseen by Nexus Innovations for passengers to log discrimination incidents. Every complaint is addressed transparently and publicly. On the other end, Croft swallowed, the speakerphone exposing the fatigue in his breath. You're asking me to overhaul my company's entire culture, mid-flight. No, Elias replied. I'm giving you the chance to do it before the market, the press, and your customers force your hand. The difference is, this time, you get to choose. Katherine Pierce stood just off the aisle, her shoulders faintly trembling, knowing each word Elias spoke was sketching out a future she had never prepared for. Elias turned toward her, meeting her eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. His voice dropped, but still carried across the suite. Mrs. Pierce, I don't want to destroy your career. I want you to be the first to complete this training. And when you finish, you'll lead it. Punishment without redemption is just revenge. Katherine's eyes flickered. A single tear slipped onto the back of her hand. She gave a small nod, not a promise, but acceptance. Croft's voice came back different now. Elias, I'll do as you ask. All of it. I want my system back in 5 minutes. Elias leaned forward slightly, weighing the worth of each second before answering. You'll have your system, but you'll lose the right to keep everything the way it was. Ava leaned toward the elderly woman in 1F, whispering, Do you see this? He's changing an airline mid-flight. The woman smiled faintly, eyes bright. Not just an airline. The way people see each other. In 1C, the man who'd once barked to drag him out now sat upright, silent, as though afraid the live stream might catch his expression. David, the young attendant, murmured to Katherine, I didn't know it would come to this." Katherine didn't answer. She simply rested a hand on his arm, a gesture that was part reassurance, part shared accountability. Elias slowly returned his attention to the phone. "Julian, you and I will sign a contract addendum tomorrow morning. I'll restore your system right now. But remember this, Omega is only asleep, not dead, and it will wake if it has to." Silence on the other end. Then Croft's voice, low but clear, "I understand." Elias ended the call. The celestial suite sank into a different kind of quiet. Not the stiff, suffocating silence of imposed authority, but the clarity that comes after a storm, when the air feels sharper, cleaner. Ava kept her camera rolling, but now panned to the entire cabin. Katherine standing still, shoulders lowered, David with his head bowed, Miller avoiding Elias's gaze, and Elias, already back at his laptop, as if he'd never left his stream of code. In 1F, the elderly woman gave Elias a small nod. The nod of someone who had witnessed decades of struggle and knew when justice had turned a corner. Elias returned the look without a smile, without a nod, but enough for her to know he understood. The captain's voice came back over the intercom, steady again. "Crew, prepare for takeoff." The aircraft's wheels began to roll, runway lights streaking past the windows like falling stars. And in that moment, everyone in the suite knew. They had just witnessed not merely a personal standoff, but the birth of a new standard, and once set, it could never be undone. Elias set the satellite phone down on the table beside the glass of water still ringed with condensation. Without another word, he reopened his laptop. The screen lit up, returning to the exact string of code he'd been working on before the chaos erupted: quantum encryption sequence. His fingers moved across the keyboard as if there had never been an interruption. The atmosphere in the celestial suite, once thick and suffocating, remained silent. But now it was a different silence, one weighted with respect. In seat 1C, the investor quietly slipped his phone into his pocket. He no longer tried to check stock prices. He knew the numbers had shifted, and not just on the market. In 1F, the elderly woman adjusted her scarf, eyes still fixed on Elias. Perhaps she would tell this story to her grandchildren one day. Proof that sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. It can be served midair. Ava in 2 ended her live stream, not out of fear, but because she knew this moment didn't need more broadcasting. It had already spread far enough. She switched to private recording, capturing Elias at work as if nothing had happened. A man who could command a storm and then return to his task. Katherine Pierce remained standing in the aisle, one hand on the seat back to steady herself as the aircraft began to taxi. She looked at Elias as though waiting for a word of forgiveness, but received only a glance in return. No contempt, no pity, just a look that compelled her to examine herself. That was when she understood. Forgiveness wasn't given in words. It had to be proven through action. David, the young attendant, stepped forward and quietly placed a fresh bottle of water on Elias's table. No words were exchanged. Elias neither thanked nor refused, just gave a slight nod. In this context, it was enough. Officer Miller slipped out of the suite, closing the door behind him without a sound. He knew he'd narrowly avoided a career-ending incident, but also that he'd witnessed something rare, power wielded to build rather than destroy. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Prepare for takeoff." The cabin lights steadied, their soft amber glow spilling over leather and polished ebony. The personal entertainment systems flickered back on, the Ascendia Air logo reappearing, but no one seemed to notice. The tires hissed faintly against the runway, then gathered speed. At the moment the aircraft left the ground, Elias paused his typing and looked out the window. The sky opened, black and endless, scattered with distant points of light. No one in the cabin spoke, but everyone knew something unseen had shifted. An unwritten contract was signed in that silence. Katherine, through a wordless exchange, had agreed to make amends. David understood that just following orders could never be an excuse. The investor in 1C realized that true standards aren't measured in seat class or ticket price. The elderly woman in 1F felt hope that what she had once fought for still held value. Ava knew she had captured something that would force the world to rethink how it treats people. Elias looked around, as if to mark each witness to that contract, then bent back over his keyboard. No speeches, no rhetoric. His job wasn't to live in the moment just past, but to ensure it left a lasting mark. The plane cut through a thin layer of cloud, moonlight spilling across the wing and reflecting in Elias's window. His silhouette on the glass was simple, yet it carried the entire story. There was no applause, no cheering, only the steady hum of the engines and the rhythm of the keys. Ava whispered to the elderly woman, "Do you think this will change anything?" The woman smiled. "At the very least, it's changed everyone on this flight. And sometimes, that's enough to start." Katherine turned toward the rear of the cabin, walking slowly. She didn't avoid the passengers' eyes, as if accepting that they should see her no longer as the one in charge, but as a flawed human being learning how to stand again. David followed, his steps no longer the regimented stride of a serving attendant, but the measured pace of someone newly awakened. Elias typed the final line of code. The screen displayed, "System re-engaged." No sound accompanied it, but everything in the suite returned to normal. Wi-Fi reconnected, entertainment menus reloaded, the cockpit link stabilized. He closed the laptop and leaned back. The wheels in everyone's minds kept turning. No one looked at Elias the way they had before takeoff. They had seen what happens when a man doesn't raise his voice, doesn't slam the table, yet still flips the board entirely. The plane banked slightly, settling at cruising altitude. The seatbelt light blinked off. Passengers began to move, but conversations stayed hushed, as if they didn't want to disturb what had just been set in place. Elias closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to commit the moment to memory. A rare moment when justice and dignity found their proper place without declarations, without applause. The aircraft kept climbing, breaking through the final veil of clouds. The plane began its ascent. So did the standard for human decency. Some confrontations roar like thunder, and some cut as silently as a blade. Elias Vance chose the latter, not to bring down an opponent, but to raise the standard for everyone. This story reminds us that dignity is not something handed to you. It is something you defend, even when standing against an entire system. And sometimes, real strength isn't in tearing things down, but in the ability to rebuild them better, fairer, and more humane. If this story resonated with you, share it. Let more people see that a single right action, even if it lasts only minutes, can spark a change that endures for years. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Story Precious for more stories that will make you believe that in a noisy world, justice can still be delivered in a silence that carries weight.